Kanupiam. I'm Chrystal Baker, Indigenous Empowerment Education Coordinator of the Tomaquag Museum, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to our Culture Bearer series. Throughout this series, we hope to introduce you to some incredible Indigenous educators who have been vital to the work of sharing and preserving cultural knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our third in a year-long series, which was made possible thanks to funding from the Rhode Island State Council of the Arts, the Pepito Opportunity Connection, the New England Foundation for the Arts, the Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, Rhode Island Charge, other anonymous funders, and many community donors. You too can support programs like this by making a tax-deductible donation to the Tomaquag Museum. Visit our website to support. And just a quick reminder before we get started, please make sure you are all on mute. You can engage during this presentation by using the chat box to type in your thoughts and reactions. We will also have time to take a few questions at the end of the presentation. Use your reaction buttons to let us see your enthusiasm. And if you're having any technical trouble, use the chat box to private message Tomaquag Tech for assistance. Now I'd like to introduce you to Linda Coombs. Linda is a citizen of the Aquinnah Wampanoag tribe on Martha's Vineyard, who has lived in Mashpee for more than 40 years. She has worked for 45 years as a museum educator for such establishments as the Boston Children's Museum, the Wampanoag Indigenous Program at Plymouth Plantation, and the Aquinnah Cultural Center, a house museum built by an Aquinnah Wampanoag man and showing that history. She has been an interpreter, an artisan, a researcher, led workshops and teacher institutes, written children's stories and articles on various aspects of Wampanoag history and culture, and developed and worked on all aspects of a wide variety of exhibits. The goal of all her work continues to be the communication of accurate and appropriate representations about the history, cultures, and people of the Wampanoag and other Indigenous nations. So please join me in welcoming today's guest, Linda Coombs.
Thank you, Chrystal. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. And I wanted to talk about the Wampanoag program at Plymouth Plantation. And I didn't even realize it when I thought that this is what my topic would be, but this is actually the 50th year that program has been going. So I wanted to start out by giving a little background. It was started in 1971 and opened to the public in the following year in 1972. And at that time, it was known as the Native American Studies Program. And the directors were two Narragansett people, Ella Sekata and Eric Thomas. And and at that time, we had just one small wetu, some garden areas, and that was about it. We started off relatively small, but the program was started with the intent to have Native people tell history from our own perspective. That was the charge, because of course up the hill, above us was the Pilgrim Village and all the history that they were relating. The program, probably its strongest feature and one of the things that attracted Native people from many tribes to come and work with us was the fact that we had the opportunity to learn as much as we could the ancient skills and technologies of our ancestors, so that everything that people saw on the Wampanoag home site, as we came to call it, was made by the staff. Okay, our entire staff was our group of artisans, if you will. And we we had to balance out the availability of natural materials with the need to furnish the exhibit. So sometimes we would purchase things like, for example, manufactured hemp, which we used in place of hand rolled cordage and things like that, because it would take forever to make like enough cordage to make one mat or one woven bag. So we kind of had to, you know, cheat a little bit. And over the years, though, you know, the program did grow. We had a lot of bumps and issues along the way, but growing pains, I guess, is a good term. But in the early 80s, we changed the name to the Wampanoag Indian Program, since Plymouth, or, you know, the village of Patuxet was basically in the middle of Wampanoag territory. And it just seemed more appropriate because that was the primary group of people that the Pilgrims were dealing with. Let's see. So everything that the visitors saw, from the weetus or the houses to the clothing, we did a cooking exhibit. We had gardens. We eventually came to have a mashoon or a canoe, dugout canoe exhibit, and everything that furnished the home site, you know, the house and everything around it, you know, was made by staff. So what that means is that, you know, all the baskets and bags, clothing, furs, all the different tools, whether they were made of bone or stone or wood or metal, you know, just everything. We, as much as possible, we would go out and collect the materials. So every year it was a big deal to go out and get cattails. We used to go and get 3 truckloads. It's a little bit different than the ancestors because they didn't have, you know, dump trucks or pickup trucks to handle big amounts of these reeds. But, you know, and we also had to travel just south of Boston, okay, which is something our ancestors did not have to do to get cattails. In those days, you know, in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, we had to travel 25 miles the other side of Boston to get bulrush. And those are the 2 types of reeds that we used in making mats. And we had a workshop that was built just to accommodate that mat making. So we could spray water in there literally to keep these reeds wet when we were working with them. It had a drain in the floor. It was made just, you know, for that purpose. And every year we used to make like 14 cattail mats for one weetu, and they were different sizes. I have some pictures later I can show you. They were different sizes, but depending on where they would go on the house. On the inside, we made mats out of bulrush, and which insulate. And it was, you know, very gratifying to have people say, you know, they'd come out of the Pilgrim Village in April or October or something, and they'd come down and sit in one of our houses and go, oh, it's the first time I've been warm all day, because our ancestors knew how to build houses that kept them warm in the cold weather or cool in the hot weather, which the English hadn't quite, you know, gotten on to then. So, you know, going to gather these materials was a big production, because you have to not only cut them, but the cattails and the bulrush each required a different method of processing them. Cattails come several leaves on a stalk, and they have to be split. We organized them into piles of long and short to dry, and then they were ready to, you know, to be used. The bulrush we had to boil to remove the sap from them. That is what enabled those rushes, you know, when they became mats, to absorb any humidity or dampness, moisture in the air. And depending on whether you have a fire in the house or not, will heat or cool the house to as much as 10 degrees cooler than outside. Or, you know, some of the colonial records talk about the houses were like 70 degrees or more. And they talk about children running out and diving into snowbanks because it was so hot in the house. But we used to also get the cedar poles for the frames of the houses. And later on, we began to also collect huge sheets of bark uh, for the outer coverings of the houses. And these are, hugely physical, labor intensive processes. And with the bark for the outer covering, we would have to coordinate with sawmills when they had just cut poplar or ash or some type of tree that we know was used to obtain the bark. And we would go in for 2 or 3 days and just peel bark. And doing all of this work, it certainly gives you an appreciation and an understanding of the depth of knowledge that our ancestors had. Even though we had to, as I said, cheat and buy hemp or using trucks or going into sawmills, you can still kind of extrapolate on the thinking, as to the knowledge that our ancestors had, and it becomes mind-boggling. We also obtained logs, usually from sawmills, usually 12 to 15 feet to make dugout canoes. And a few years ago, they got one that was 40 feet long. Because we know that, our boats back in the day were, at least it could be that long. They could hold 20 people in a row or 2 people sitting abreast. So huge, huge trees. That tells you something about the landscape of the time, because these boats were not unusual to have that size, boat. We also process things like different plants, milkweed, dogbane, basswood bark, inner bark of cedar to make cordage. And this is where we had to, purchase the hemp if we had to make enough mats and bags and what have you to furnish our exhibit. But we still kept on learning these processes, in the background, nevertheless. It got so that every fall, hunters would leave bags with deer skins from the deer that they had gotten that year, at our door. We'd come in the morning and find 3 or 4 deer hides, which, we would, could tan. We actually at one point had so many, we had to send them out to be tanned at a factory, because we never had the staff because some of these processes just take so long, and they are what they are, and they take as long as they do. But for baskets, we use cedar bark, basswood bark, ash splint, corn husk, grapevine, corn leaf, cattail, bulrush, milkweed, dogbane, all sorts of materials. And, it just makes me wonder, what is it that we don't know from what our ancestors did? We use different types of stone and made hide scrapers, arrow points, axe heads, adzes, knife blades, hammer stones, fish weights, grinders or straighteners like for arrowheads, not arrowheads, but arrow shafts, gorgets, which is a pendant, a slate pendant that the men would wear, different earrings and pendants. Out of wood, we made mortars for grinding corn, pestles, I forgot pestles in the stone column here, mortars, bowls, wooden bowls, ladles, spoons, stirring paddles, different tool handles. I was making this list and I feel like I'm forgetting half the stuff, but bone, we made arrow points out of such things as the hollow wing bones or leg bones of deer or goose or turkey. We also use deer bone, which is more solid, to make arrow points. We made knife handles. Like I had a knife when working there. It was just a short deer bone, and it was just a perfect fit for your hand from some part of the deer's leg. We made fish hooks, hide scrapers, debarking tools, awls for making holes in leather, hoe blades, metal. There was copper that was used here and found in small amounts in this area. And we also traded with people from the Great Lakes area for copper, where we made small items such as jewelry, tools, knife blades, spoons, things of that nature. And once contact was made, we also made similar things with brass. I think it's extremely important to keep these arts alive. You know, as I was saying, I never thought about it at the time. This sort of a process that went on in my mind as time went on. But having to travel to get these materials, like people used to ask us, well, how come you don't live like this anymore? In this traditional way with weetos and gardens and dugout canoes. And it's like, did you notice all the houses and stores and roadways and, all of that sort of thing, when you were driving in here? Because that's basically why. Not only is there more stuff on the landscape, but the whole landscape itself has changed so radically, from what it was in the 17th century. And it makes me feel very sad because I can't even begin to describe, this is something I'm just sort of starting to really grasp, but the way that our ancestors kept the land and used it without destroying it, it was pretty amazing. And it was their connection to the land, their respect. I think that's the last word, the bottom line. Because whatever the land was doing, they let it do. And they worked with it in ways that was beneficial for humans, but it also benefited the land. Okay. And when Europeans came and just started essentially clear cutting for farms and that sort of thing, I mean, it's not just cutting down trees and taking those lives, but the loss of those trees affects the waters. It affects everything else around it. So things just change. And so because of the way that European civilization spread over our land, that in itself just prevents us from relating to the land in the way that we used to. Even though we have the thought and the caring and we may do ceremony, we can't go out on the land because it's, private property or, what have you. So, it's very different. And hence the traveling, 50 miles or 60 miles to get bulrush. We had one interesting thing happen that after years and years of traveling all that way to collect these bulrush and then processing them on the site at Plymouth, apparently some of the seed got loose and rooted itself in water just south of Plymouth, down in Manomet, which is part of Plymouth. So, and as I understand it, the water that they're in is actually not a natural body of water, but it's a big pond. But I think it was formed from runoff from the road, not in a real commercial area. It's right down by the ocean, but there's a lot of houses. But there's a huge field of bulrush in there that grow tall and green, and they're wonderful. So it's a little like repatriation, I guess, right there. I think another thing, not only changes in the landscape, but changes in our legal status as people, also is a factor in changing how we could relate to the land. Because in the 17th century, there were all sorts of laws in Massachusetts anyway, and I imagine that there's a version of that in every state. But it prevented us from going on to land that was no longer ours. And in the Wampanoag language, there's a word, our word for land is aki. And I'm not a linguist either, so I don't pretend to be able to understand all this, but it's like that word, you know, it has to be somebody's land. You can't just say like land. So if I say my land, it's nataki, the N part, you know, indicating me or I, or, and, but then again, it has to have a suffix, and that suffix is M. So I'd say natakim. And what that M tells you is that myself and the land are one thing. We're inalienable. We cannot be separated from each other. Okay. And coming out of the 17th century, mid 17th century, you saw this a lot, that M suffix on not just the word for land, but it also has to go on other words as well. But it was on them, on these words, indicating that relationship with the land, that understanding of the land. But by the mid 18th century, you began to see the M dropped because we were losing land left and right through the English, you know, court system and legalities and, you know, all of that sort of thing. And we were prevented from relating to the land as we always had. And finally, it got into people's minds that it is different now. So they dropped that M from the language. So, you know, these changes affect things on a lot of different levels. And I guess I could show the slides now. This is some of the work that I've done over the years. And I've chosen pictures of some of the things that I have ended up making the most of, because when, you know, during the Wampanoag program, we, you know, the women learned how to do all the things that women did. Weaving, hide tanning, making clothing. We decorated clothing with either porcupine quill work or with painted designs, which you'll see on some of my work here. And men did all the men's techniques and skills, if you will. So, and I have two pictures of beaded items that I've made, and I put those first because that is something that I started doing in my early 20s, even before I went to work at Plymouth. Okay, so I had that much going on. So these are two wristbands that I made. Oh, my goodness gracious. I think the top one was in the 70s, and I think the second one I made in the 80s. And actually the smaller wristband is supposed to reflect like a design on a bulrush mat. So next slide, please. And those two wristbands are both made on looms. These moccasins, the toe piece was applique or just beads sewn on leather, which I'm not fantastic at, but there they are. That was an order that I had made for somebody with dragonflies. So next slide. Okay, this is a small cattail mat. This was sort of like a sample mat that I made for another museum, I think at some point in the 90s. And I think it's 4 to 5 feet long at this top woven edge. And we used to make them that were 10 feet long. Okay, and then this one is relatively short. It looks like it might be 5 feet, but the mats could be 6 feet or more because the cattails are very tall. And we used to, you know, try to max out the length of them to get as much mat as we could. And, you know, and we if you can see the mats are actually double-sided. So if you turned it around, it looks the same. And there's actually kind of four reeds like facing each other, if you will, that are attached at that top woven edge. And then you'll see like lines going across at intervals of a foot or give or take. And that is where the reeds are just sewn together, you know, because these go on the outside of the house. We can get 2 years, two summer seasons out of, you know, one set of mats. And so we sewed them at these intervals just to hold the the reeds together, and there's a way to sew it so that from that top woven edge, the mat will actually fan out and become wider at the bottom. And that is to accommodate the round shape of the weetu. And the middle row of sewing, you'll see looks a bit different, because in that row, we actually turn the reeds around so that the inside of the reed is facing outward. And that's because they're sort of U-shaped or cup-shaped. And the rain is, the intention is for the rain to go down the tops of the reeds, and when it hits at midpoints, it gets channeled off in those cup-shaped spaces. Okay. And you can see that the bottom of the mat is left unwoven. It is just attached together, so it doesn't fly away. But that way the water will just drip off the side of the house. And they work. People used to say, oh, don't these leak? And it's like, well, people put stuff on the roof of their house so they don't leak. That's the intention. And people use these mats for how many thousands of years? And people aren't going to keep using something if it doesn't work. And it always kind of amazed me that with the visitors, you sort of had to walk them through that thought process. But anyway, that's a little bulrush mat. And next slide. Okay, this is a bag. It's actually my second bag that I ever made. My first one was a little square envelope style. And this is with the commercial hemp, not with natural plant fiber. I still haven't spent a whole lot of time with that to be able to whip that out to make a bag this size. This bag was maybe 15 inches high and 10 inches across, something like that, with a woven strap. And we used to try to make things in the way that we knew people did. So with the material, the technique is called twining. And what you're looking at is the weft strings, and in the middle there, which you can't see, are warps. And because there are two weft strings that are single twisted or double twisted around each one of the warps. So whether you're looking at it on the inside or the outside, you're looking at those weft strings, which create the design. Next slide. And this is a smaller bag that I made for another museum in Rhode Island, actually. Actually, I don't know if it was a museum or a private collector so many years ago. I don't remember. But anyway, a little woven bag. And you see this one has a different top, where the other one was woven all the way up to its rim. This one has spaces, for the tie straps to be put in there. Okay, next slide. And this bag is one that I made 30 years ago, and it's made out of wool. All the weft strings are wool. I did it on, I twined the wool around hemp, and then again it also has another different type of a finishing where instead of working the strings back down in to secure them so the bag doesn't unravel, they were wrapped and then wrapped with in this case wool yarn. And wool was something that came into use later on, at least by the 19th century, I would think. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next few slides are a series of deerskin pouches. And again, while we were learning to tan hides, to clothe people and to have material for items like this, we did purchase commercially tan hides, and work with that. So and this is paint on there, not beadwork or anything else, but paint, and it's acrylic paint. And again, you know, it's like sometimes we would make paint because we knew they used red ochre, yellow ochre, which are mineral ores, either soot or charcoal for the black. There's also graphite in the area, and these would be ground up into powder. And for an item like this, you would mix the powder with hide glue and apply it. And nowadays we're applying acrylic paint with toothpicks, you know, because it's, you know, you're working on the leather and it has that nappy side, and a brush just, you know, you wouldn't be able to utilize that, you know, very well. It just wouldn't work. So we use a toothbrush so you can, you know, have some clarity, you know, in your design. Okay, next slide. And again, these first two bags, this one and the previous one, we try to, you know, make designs on them in the way that our ancestors did. And as it has turned out, everyone that does this work, they sort of have their own style. You can, you know, you can recognize people's work. And of course, you know, our ancestors didn't have a formula and you have to use red only here and black only there or whatever, but they were individual artists as well. So this is, you know, how we bring this back into ourselves, you know, as Wampanoag or people in this case. Next slide. This one, you know, I put, I'm not much of a pictorial artist, but this is actually supposed to be Scusset Beach. This I made for the passing of a very dear friend, and Scusset Beach, which is down by the Sagamore Bridge coming onto Cape Cod, was one of his favorite places. So I made that for him because, again, this is something that, you know, all of these things that I've talked about and am showing you have come out of the Wampanoag program and out into the community. And there's many people now that, you know, do a lot of these different, you know, arts and skills. So next slide. This is one of a deer standing between two trees. It's a little blurry. I didn't have a really good original picture. And I think I did put some beadwork on the rim of this bag. Because again, it's deerskin, but it's a modern take on a traditional skill, if you will. Okay, thank you. Next slide. This one was a special order from a friend who, this was her horse, whose name was Cassie, and Cassie passed away at the age of 30. It's pretty old for a horse. And my friend wanted me to make her a pouch and 3 others for, you know, different people that helped her with Cassie at the barn that she was lived at. And so, you know, these items come into many different uses, so, or many different meanings for people. Next. This is the last slide, I think. And this entire outfit, of which we could only see part of it, there's a ribbon shirt, the woven sash, the beaded medallion. In 1980 or 82, I'm not quite sure which anymore, but we did a clothing exhibit. And that was during a period when Paula Jennings from Narragansett was the director of the program. But we did a clothing exhibit. So we had 5 mannequins, which were made, you know, in the image of actual native people, 2 people from Alaska, as it happens. And so we had 2 deerskin outfits, a man's and a woman's, and then 3 different, you know, more like, you know, traditional dress today, or like what people might wear at a powwow or a ceremony. So we have the ribbon shirt, the woven sash, the beaded medallion that I've made, the rosette. So, so that's some of the stuff that I've done over the years. I haven't made a cattail mat or a bulrush mat. And I was thinking about it recently because I actually think that I still remember how to make them after 20 or 30 years. So at least I hope I do. So, and I'd be glad to take any questions at all. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna open the chat and see if we do have, looks like we have a few questions here for you, Linda. Go down through. Well, a comment. Hi, Linda. Nancy from the NEH 2017. I have my 7th grade class watching and listening to you. Susan Wise says, hi, Linda. Susan Wise from Minnesota. And they came to NEH 2017 too.
Yep. Yeah, I saw their names. Hi, Nancy. Hi, Suzanne.
And Caroline greetings from Westerly, Rhode Island. This is fascinating. Thank you for sharing Linda's wealth of knowledge. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, Linda. Let's see. So Catherine is saying these pieces are amazing. Okay, here's a question. Rose Doherty is asking, what is the material used for the clasp on the last slide? So the last slide would have been the ribbon shirt.
Right. That is, I think it's a piece of antler. I didn't make it myself. Another person did, but it, antler or bone. I think it's antler. I mean, like I said, that we did that exhibit back in like 82. So it's been a minute. But antler, then, incised so we can have the black ink design on it.
Okay. Dawn Dove says, so glad to see you and hear you. You are always fabulous. Holly Wald is saying, wonderful presentation and thank you. And here's a question. Do you know if the cattails are buoyant plants?
Buoyant.
Buoyant.
Well, I'll answer it this way. They grow in water, or they can grow in water. We were fortunate in the one swamp that we still use, it's just south of Boston. You have to cross a little stream to get to it. But once you're in the swamp, unless it's been raining heavily, the only time I ever saw water in it was after a hurricane. So, but they do grow in water. Sometimes you have to go and cut them by boat. They contain a very thick, sticky sap, and that's what enables them to shed the water, because when they get wet, they swell. And that's why they're effective in the mat covering. But whether they're buoyant, I can't really say, but they're, they're a water plant and used to repel water, so.
We do have another question. Natalie is asking, did you also eat very young cattails as food? And what besides the 3 sisters was in the gardens? So did you eat very young cattails?
We ate cattail shoots in the spring. I'm not sure about the tubers, which if they were eaten, they were gotten in the fall. And then in like June or this time of year and into June, there's a seed head or something that forms and was used as a vegetable, kind of asparagus-like. So, and what was the other part of that question?
What besides the 3 sisters was in the gardens?
So in addition to corn, beans, and different types of squashes, there was melons, sunflowers for the seeds, and pumpkins, which are squashes for all practical purposes.
So Amy would like to say thank you so much, Linda. Also beautiful and powerful, and you teach us how your brilliant artistry carries ancestral knowledge into the future. And I agree with that. Nancy says, I remember the cranberries from Martha's Vineyard. What was made with them?
Cranberries were food, obviously. They can be used as a medicine or even as a food. They're a medicine because of their high, vitamin C content. They were used as dye, I believe. And that's it as far as I know.
Okay, Ina would like to know, are these skills being taught in your school programs? And says, thank you for all your work.
I don't think they largely are. This was a museum program and it was a very special one. Unfortunately, it is not the same as it was, years ago. But, people, I think these, depending on which art or skill you're talking about, people will teach it within their family, teach their kids or their sister or, whatever, or their friend. So it's not in as much of an organized way, but just more in a community way. So.
I actually have a question, but there's one comment. Suzanne said she looked the cattails up and it says that during World War II, they used them to fill life vests. That's an interesting piece of information.
Yeah.
Joyce Rain says, greetings from Bridgewater, Linda. So good to see you here and thank you for sharing this knowledge. And my question, Linda, if I could just throw one in there.
Sure.
Actually, I appreciated very much all that you were sharing about the difference between how you gathered all of those resources to do these different projects in the 70s, I believe you were saying, and the time and the energy it took. And how that kind of gave you an understanding of how our ancestors may have been processing this. And one of the things that you can't experience, I think, unless you're doing it, is that inner experience. And I wonder if you could describe how were you feeling when you were actually in that time and in those places creating and gathering all of this, and just how was that making you feel?
I loved it. I mean, I just, loved learning what our ancestors knew. I was just saying this yesterday, I've said it often, so I'll say it again, that back in those days when I was in my 20s and starting out, at Plymouth and in museum work, I very naively wanted to learn everything that my ancestors knew. So, it's been 48 years, not 45, and I've learned this much, of what they know. And I realize that what I've learned is, like a drop in the bucket compared to the knowledge that they had, and then they were doing it over how many thousands of years. And it was just what you did when you got up on Tuesday, so, but, I loved it. I was, a strong person, in my youth and could handle going out in the swamps. And I loved it. Whatever I could. Yeah. So.
No, thank you for sharing that. I do have a couple of other questions. I missed one. So one of the students, the screen keeps switching. Okay, here's the question. One of my students, Makia, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, asks, how did you learn to make all of that? Who taught you?
Well, this was all done at Plymouth. And as far as my weaving, it was Ella. She's the, a specific person that taught me how to weave. And then, as you're working with different people over the years and somebody else thinks this, some new way to do something, so you pick up pointers as you go along, it's that sort of thing. But it was Nani Pashamit, or Anthony Pollard, who worked with us for many years, 20 years as our researcher. And for the last several years of his life, he died at a very young age, was the director of the program. And I learned the regalia making, the leather work, you know, from him, and the painting and everything. And yeah, and I mean, mat weaving was just, you know, that was just either Ella or other people in the program, you know, back in those days, you know, when we were first starting that out. So, yeah.
I love that. I love to have that opportunity myself one day. Holly says, thank you, Suzanne and Linda, for info on possible buoyancy of cattails. I will do some experiments and they will teach me too. Natalie Johnson asks, what were your sources for learning these skills?
Oh boy. You know, that all of these skills, I don't think any of them, with the exception of maybe splint basketry, had been done by us or people in southern New England. It could be 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, just depends on what it was. So we did a lot of research, okay, and the research consisted of, you know, going over the primary sources being those things written by the Pilgrims or by other Europeans that saw us, interacted with us, and wrote down what they saw. And unfortunately, they weren't too good at creating how-to books, because they might say something like, oh, they created many beautiful baskets very artificially, which in the 17th century meant by hand. Okay, that word has a different meaning then than it does now. And they use blue and black and red and green, and it's like, okay, gotta start somewhere, right? We also looked to other tribes who have a similar material culture, and at what they did, and they may have been making things like Ojibwe made cattail and bulrush mats later, much later than we were, at least as far as I know. So we were able to learn from them, at least through written sources. We also had to learn by just sitting down and going, okay, twining. All right, and you can go and get any basketry book, it'll show you how to do twining. And we would just start doing it. And, you know, and as far as designs, just, you know, based on the research that we had, you know, we just built it, you know, over 40 years. So, and it might not be exactly what Wampanoag or Narragansett or, you know, Mohegan, whatever people were doing in the 17th century, but we're doing it again. And I think the ancestors would at least recognize it, you know. I sometimes thoughts in my head that they're sitting around, you know, rolling over, laughing at our attempts here, but after how many 100-year break or, you know, interruption, but it's the thought that counts, right?
It is. It's a wonderful, actually a wonderful attempt. And it is still a preservation of Indigenous knowledge and culture, truly. So thank you for that answer. Orlando says, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm wondering, how might you approach the situation of Indigenous people who are far away from their ancestral homeland when it comes to reclaiming ancestral practices, but being far away from the ecology and materials? You kind of answered a little of that in your response that you just gave.
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer for that. That's very difficult. You know, other than to learn from what's in the area where you're at now, you know, or you can certainly learn about either, you know, through books or online nowadays or whatever, learn about whatever people, whatever they did.
Mm,
I mean, shoot, you can get cedar bark and all kinds of stuff online now. It's crazy.
mhm,
I mean, it doesn't compare to going out and getting it yourself by any stretch of the imagination, but you know,
mhm.
that's difficult, very difficult situation.
True. I think we have another question. Natalie asks, I wonder how much of it was cellular memory. And I also imagine that the ancestors lent some assistance from beyond.
I absolutely agree with that. I think they did. I think they were with us. They are with us. A thought that just popped in my mind was one of the guys that worked with us. This may be, I don't know, 25 years ago, but it was at night. He was down on the home site and he took a picture with a flash inside of our nushwitu, or a house with two fires, a house about 30 or 35 feet long. And when he got the picture back, it was full of orbs, which we often say are spirits or ancestors. They were different sizes and there was like layer and layer and layer and layers of them, and I made me wonder if it was their version of trying to get 20 people in a phone booth like they did back in the 50s or something. There were so many just there, so absolutely, I believe that they are communicating with us in whatever way we're able to receive it.
I agree. I agree. I think that as well, if I could just add another point, oftentimes thoughts just come to you and you can only attribute it to your ancestors speaking to you. It's a knowledge, some sort of a knowing, and it comes from within, and it just kind of helps frame your thought or your work or whatever it is that you're putting your hands to do when you're doing it in that way of just trying to use those natural resources. And
Yep.
you feel so close actually to your ancestors at that time. At least that's been my experience as well.
Yep.
I don't see any more questions coming. I do just want to give everyone a last opportunity in case I missed any questions. Our wonderful tech person has been letting me know when I've missed a question or two. But I'm not seeing any questions that I may have missed. So Holly says, thank you so much. You're getting a lot of thank yous for your presentation. I'm also going to say thank you, Linda, so much. It has been a pleasure to meet you, even on this online Zoom. I was looking forward to today for this opportunity. And I've loved your sharing. Personally, I have loved your sharing as well, because it's one thing to be born in this, well, I guess 20th century I was born in, but we're in the 21st century now, and oftentimes feeling so far disconnected from those earlier times so long ago.
Right.
But artists such as yourself and the incredible work that you do, it does it brings it closer. It brings it this visible, something we can see, and the working with your hands. And I can imagine that you must have such an overwhelming feeling of even transporting back in time when you're working with some of those materials, creating some of those things. And so this presentation certainly has that experience as well. There's a couple more comments coming through very quickly, and we will take a minute for them. As the matriarch and family historian, this is Catherine, is saying, as the matriarch and family historian, I have come to learn about my Indigenous heritage. Who may I contact to further information about how to connect back to the ancestors? So I guess you would have to look into her whatever the tribe is that she's finding an affiliation to, perhaps, depending on where she lives. Maybe there's a tribal genealogy department that could help her with that, would you say?
Yep.
Let's see. Deanna Ruiz says, thank you for sharing your knowledge. It's a pleasure and a privilege to hear your perspective. Natalie says, thank you so much. Wonderful as always. Thanks also to Tomaquag for this Culture Bearer series. You're welcome. Catherine is in Connecticut. So I'm not sure, Catherine, if we have the answer to that question, but I would say if you're living in Connecticut and you have an interest to check back into your ancestry, you may want to contact whatever, depending on where you live, whatever some of the nearby tribes are, and find out if they can help you with that. And so with that, Linda Katabatash, thank you for sharing your cultural knowledge today, your beautiful artistry, and your commitment to preserving this knowledge for future generations. I want to thank you, the viewers, for joining us for this Culture Bearer series. And before you go, I'd like to invite you back next month for our fourth in the series. On June 26th, which is a Sunday, Cassius Spears Jr. will be presenting The Rivers Connects Us. You can register on the Tomaquag site, tomaquagmuseum.org. You can sign up for that series and get more information on the details. Also, our Strawberry Thanksgiving this year will be in person. Hopefully it doesn't rain. Saturday, June 11th from 10 to 2 here on the grounds of Tomaquag, and you can find details for that on site as well. We hope to see you there. If you're interested in more cultural programming, Tomaquag Museum offers a large variety of tours, visiting museum educator services, virtual presentations, workshops, professional development, and more. And I can attest to that as a new employee here. You can learn more on our website or give us a call or send an email to discuss the options. Today's presentation, along with many others, will be available on our YouTube page. So be sure to circle back and share with your family and friends this information. If you missed it, thank you again to our funders at the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts, Rhode Island Council for the Humanities, Rhode Island Charge, the Pepito Opportunity Connection, the New England Foundation for the Arts, and other generous funders and donors like you. Please consider making a tax-deductible donation to the Tomaquag Museum. You can also support local Indigenous artists by shopping and sharing our online store, a branch of our program for Indigenous empowerment. Excuse me, I am getting over a cold. Tabatnyana Wayan, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again next month. Wani Kisak, have a good afternoon.